My name is Zach Saylor, if I haven't met you yet. I'm a staff engineer at Apple working on their notebooks team. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm calling the corporate open source divide and how we're going to bridge that gap. And hopefully at the end of the day, I feel, or I hope that you guys have a practical guide. If you're an engineer working at a company, this talk will help you identify a practical trajectory to becoming a contributor to Jupyter. So jumping in, let's just say, what I'm trying to do here is I want to address two categories of engineers that I think might be sitting in the room. If you don't fall into these categories, I think that's okay. I think this is an interesting thing to tune into. But I really want to talk about this interesting social dynamic that I see happening in the Jupyter ecosystem between engineers at corporations who are interested in coming into the Jupyter community and submitting pull requests or changes or feature requests and things like that. And then the open source maintainers, those who are receiving these pull requests and trying to navigate how to manage that interaction. And it can be a little bit awkward. So we're going to talk about this today, but oftentimes the challenge there for an engineer from an organization who wants to contribute to open source, the barrier to entry isn't necessarily technical, it's social. So there's social dynamics at play that you have to navigate that I think we could do a better job at educating and helping people be successful in this space. So we're going to talk a lot about that. And then the last persona that I want to talk to in this meeting is leaderships at companies. So this is a little bit risky for me. These are the people in the room who maybe have engineers inside their company and you have a dependency or an interest on Jupyter. And you're trying to navigate and understand, okay, how and should I get involved in this organization with my engineers? So a little bit about me. Why am I positioned to give this talk? To be frank, I feel a little bit of an imposter syndrome here. But I do think that there's some things throughout my trajectory in my career that might give me some insights into this question and the social dynamics that I hope will be helpful to folks here today. One is that I've been working on notebooks for a long time. It's been 13 years in total, 13 plus years. My first year was as an undergraduate student at a university at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And this was back in 2012, 2011. And I met Brian Granger, who was one of the co-creators of the Jupyter Notebook. And we hit it off, and he was presenting me this idea and invited me to come in and collaborate with him on working on this project. And so I spent a good solid year funded by Jupyter to develop the original IPython notebook that shipped that year. And then I went and became a PhD student where I did less direct contributing to Jupyter, but spent a lot of time dog-fooding the thing we built for a year. And so I used it to do my research. Every publication I made in that 5-year period was written in Jupyter Notebooks and published as a set of Jupyter Notebooks as supplementary documents. I was also spending a lot of time building plugins for this, for the domain-specific research I was in. Then after my PhD, I came back to the Jupyter ecosystem full-time and was funded directly by Jupyter to work on this problem of trying to secure these notebooks and provide just additional security, event logging, and authorization identity around managing these notebooks when you're sharing them with a team. And then finally, 5 years ago, I made the switch into enterprise and worked directly for Apple and solve the problem of scaling notebooks, or I should say continually trying to solve the problem of scaling notebooks and the challenges there. So I'm going to talk about something that I feel is going to be a little touchy at points and a little sensitive. I do want to just say that this is just my vantage point, my point of view, and my opinion about how we can bring more help into Jupyter by leveraging what I would call this untapped potential that sits in companies. And so I just want you to know that we may not agree with everything that's said here, but I hope you know that my heart in this is my goal is just to get more people at Jupyter and helping Jupyter. There's far too few people carrying a large load. And so my goal is to alleviate that pressure on the people maintaining the project today. And as I said, I think that there's just this untapped potential, engineering potential that exists inside these organizations. There are people there that have the technical proficiency to look at a code base like Jupyter that is complex. There's a lot of moving parts, but they're used to inheriting internal projects like that and learning a code base very quickly and being able to contribute quickly. So my hypothesis is that the barrier to entry is not technical with this group, unlike other types of engineers that we might bring in and try to teach how to contribute to open source. Instead, this group experiences a social barrier. They're used to contributing to an open source project to an internal project by simply just submitting a PR, slacking their colleague, and having it merged and released within the hour. It's a little different in the open source space. And the reason I think that this is really important and tapping into this potential is important is because Jupyter is critical for the world. We're no longer this project that's small, running in just a few students' laptops or research professors' laptops. We're running in large Fortune 500 companies in some of the top universities in the world. And then even last year, we got the award for being an innovative piece of technology that enabled open science by the White House from the Biden administration. And so, I got to go to the White House and receive this award on behalf of the ecosystem with Fernando Perez. And, we got to sit in this room with people from the DOE, the NSF, the NIH, and all these people across the federal government. And they were there to tell us just how grateful they were for this tool that enabled them to do their work. And so we've become kind of an important piece for the world. I don't think we should take that lightly. And so I think some of the things that we felt about how we should move this project forward in the past may not apply today. We might have to shift and really focus on some things that really enable this tool to be carried into the next decade. And so maybe an obvious statement, but it's worth noting that a project that really had 100 users back in the day is not the same as a project that has 10 million users, which is kind of where we're at today, right? And so it's a lot more serious. There's real work to be done here, and it's hard work. And then maybe one last statement that should not be obvious, but we're in a new era. Maybe you guys have heard about this thing called AI, but it's kind of on the brink. And I think that the next 10 years of working in notebooks and developing notebooks is going to look a lot different because of that as well. And so this moment feels critical. Feels like we're at a point where, all right, maybe there's some strategic shifting we need to do to start to bring more people in to carry this project and the ecosystem around it into the next era. And then the thing I want to say also personally is I've sat in both spaces. I've spent a lot of time in both the open source and then watching and working with engineers, not only at my company, but at other companies. I don't know what it is about this project, but it attracts some of the smartest people I've ever seen in one place. Super unique. And so we should enjoy that, and we should relish that, but we should also really work together to leverage that. All right, so I'm going to start addressing personas one by one. So for the corporate engineers, the engineers sitting inside of a company interested in contributing to Jupyter, maybe because you have a dependency on it, or it's a project you're interested in, or your team is using it heavily. It's important that we put ourselves in the shoes of the other person. Your friend, the open source maintainer, which might be a corporate engineer, by the way, so I want to necessarily separate those, but oftentimes that person is feeling overworked and overwhelmed by their open source work. And that is because there is a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of work coming in, and it's shouldered by a small group of people, and they feel the weight of that. So know that when you're entering in with an idea or a contribution or something you want to do, know that you're facing somebody who might be feeling these things, okay? And I've seen a lot of people get burnt out in the open source because of these feelings. And then the last thing that is a little bit awkward to talk about, because we're not supposed to talk about finances, but oftentimes these people are maybe underpaid or unpaid in that work. And what I mean by that is they might be getting a paycheck somewhere, and it might be a healthy paycheck, but oftentimes not for the work they're doing here. They're borrowing time they get from their work and their day jobs to do this work. And so that work is underpaid and unpaid oftentimes. And so know that the incentives there generally aren't financial, right? People care about the project, so that's why they're there. So know that this is like kind of their heart, blood, and sweat right into the project that you are engaging with. So it's deeply personal. And then maybe an obvious point to some of us, but not all of us, is that contributing to open source is very different to contributing to open source code bases. What I mean by that is if I submit a PR internally, I know the person to Slack and have it reviewed within 10 minutes and released within the hour. Those dynamics don't play in open source, right? Oftentimes you have to get a lot more buy-in. Sometimes if you're new to the ecosystem, you submit a PR and it could take weeks for someone to show up and review it because they don't know you, right? And they have limited amount of time, so they have to figure out where to apply their resources and their time and bandwidth. And so it's a different experience. So there's a lot more patience involved, and there's a lot more social dynamics we'll go into around that. And maybe one last thing I want to say about that is this code has more eyes on it than your internal code. There's stuff that I've pushed internally. My manager's in the room, so I shouldn't be saying this. There's stuff I pushed internally that doesn't have the same level of love and care to make sure that it's stable that I put into a Jupyter PR, right? Because I know that there's an entire 10 million users out there in the open source who depend on that. So it's a big bar. Someone told me this a long time ago, early in the community, that the currency in open source is trust. It's not dollars. You can't solve problems by just throwing financial resources at it. You have to build trust with people in the ecosystem. Again, back to that, it's a lot of unpaid labor. So you're asking for people's time. And so it's really important that you have that posture of, if I want to start to engage this community and move this thing forward, there's relationship building that I have to do. And that trust takes time, presence, and frankly, frequency. And so that means that you are showing up, you're meeting these people where they're at, you're spending time with them. There's a lot of synchronous time that has to happen over video to be successful. I wish that wasn't true. It'd be great if we could all work in our own little hubs and things would just move. The wheels would be greased out there externally for us to get things done, but that's just not practically how it works. It ends up being that you spend time with these people in person building relationship. A slightly uncomfortable thing to say is that open source is not something to control. It's not, when you have an internal code base, you control it. You might have ownership over it. You can tell other teams, hey, I'll get to you when I'm ready for you. In open source, it's not something you control, it's something you contribute to. You join hands and you help. It's a posture of helping. So that becomes a really important statement that you should hold in your head as you're starting to look at contributing pull requests and thinking about how can I help Jupyter move forward. It's a posture of contributing, not controlling. That statement's going to come back later in the talk as well. And then, yeah, again, because you're borrowing people's time, it's really important to say that caring for the people and the project ends up holding more weight than just being smart. I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of people come through the Jupyter ecosystem and have really great ideas. They're brilliant people, and they think or know that they're right, and they say that. And I'll tell you that it doesn't get received well. And the problem is that if it doesn't get received well, the people that aren't receiving it well might be the gatekeepers to that code getting in. Okay? So you have to understand that the dynamic is very different when you're approaching a project like this, where it's really the people that you're trying to meet in this place to get your work through. And so maybe the most simple thing is like, be teachable, be ready to receive feedback and criticism. If the way you respond on a PR comes off curt, because you're used to doing that to your teammates internally, looks a little different in the open source. So, and we'll talk about what the open source maintainer can do to help teach you next. But that's really the thing I think, as you're coming as an engineer outside of the open source ecosystem, posture yourself to be teachable. So just some practical steps. I'm going to go through these quickly. Again, these are practical steps that I think will get you into the ecosystem if you want to start contributing and getting involved, or your company wants to start to really help maintain this project. I'm not saying that this is the best or most efficient way. It's just the reality of where we're at today. So one of that is, I really recommend that you show up to a meeting at least twice a month for some period of time. Give this a test for 6 months. Go to a meeting every week or every other week. We have a calendar on Jupyter.org, the community page, where we have all of our meetings posted. Right? And they're all hosted on Zoom. You can join them. They're free and open. Turn on your camera every time. That's a difficult one too. I think that's easy to kind of hide between anonymity, but it's really important, again, practically, for people to see you, for them to then connect you when they see you on GitHub. Right? And then as you start to build that face and that recognition in some of these meetings, you have a higher chance of having people want to review your code. So introduce yourself, make yourself known. Find an issue to work on, maybe as a good starting place. When you have that issue, when you think you fixed that issue and you're ready to submit a PR or have submitted a PR, bring it up at the next meeting that's open on that project. And then be patient for reviewers, the hardest part of the process. And then maybe kindly mention it at the next meeting if you haven't gotten reviewers. Okay? But again, this is a posture of humility and help. That's the tone of your recommendation. And then repeat that with another issue, and then another issue, and another issue. Do this for a little bit of time. We're not talking like forever, but give yourself a good short period of time to get involved and do little stuff. Just start picking up some of the work. Build your reputation as a helper first. Okay, that's the short term. If you really want to start to build some reputation and get some reviewers, I think that's some really practical steps. Long term, by doing this, you will start to build relationships with maintainers. There are people that are the gatekeepers. You'll see the ones merging pull requests and cutting releases, and you'll develop a relationship with them as they recognize your name. And there's various ways to do that. Oftentimes, just showing up to the meetings goes a long way. And then aim to get on a sub-project. So one of those maintainers can nominate you to a sub-project. Jupyter has a dozen sub-projects you can join, and you have a voting role on that sub-project once you get into it. So aim for that. That'll take 6 months, I think, minimum. Maybe shadow a release or some other maintenance tasks for a little while. Like ask the maintainer if you can do that. Just sit in and watch them do it. I know that they will happily let you do that. And then maybe that you'll move into a spot where you can start reviewing and merging PRs yourself. And it's a good place to be. You'll find a lot of time to bond with other people in those experiences as well. Okay, the age-old question, what if my company doesn't allow me to make contributions? That's a question I can't answer right now. That's a longer discussion, but I know some people at this conference who can help you with that. We do have a foundation, if you've been watching Jupyter News in the last year, with a lot of organizations that have figured out how to create a path for their engineers of their companies to contribute to the open source project in some capacity. So they have experience with navigating the company, maybe politics or diplomacy to make that happen. And so reach out to these people, talk to them. We can get you unblocked. We can work out a way to do that. And so that's a deeper question, and I'm also happy to talk through how to do that with you outside of this session. Open source maintainers. Let's look at the shoes of our friend, the corporate engineer. Oftentimes, these people are under a lot of pressure. They have deadlines and timelines that maybe are focused on their internal product that always outrank the priority of doing open source work. Even if they have a dependency on Jupyter, they would love to give you their time. They want to give you your time, but oftentimes they just don't have that luxury. And so they have low bandwidth. And then I want to call out that there is that social dynamic that we just went through that is intimidating if you are not used to open source work, right? And so that is an intimidating thing to navigate. I've watched countless engineers also struggle with that they're technically proficient. You don't have to teach them anything. And yet they won't submit a PR because they're afraid of, am I wording this correctly? Or is this code good enough? And they almost want someone to give a pre-review of their review. And so just know that that's what they're walking into. It's an intimidating spot. So it's really up to you as the gatekeepers of these projects. I think I want to challenge us to really try to accelerate trust as much as possible. And to be clear, many of these maintainers are doing a great job of this already. So this isn't a critique, this is more of encouragement. It's our job as the maintainers to accelerate the opportunities for people to get involved and plugged in. And like I said, I think what's different in Jupyter when we've tried to bring on new contributors, we focused a lot on training them technically. We'll put out these guides of how do you build a Jupyter Lab extension, and it's telling them about the NPM or Yarn build system tool chains or the Python tool chains. And that's helpful to a class of contributors, and I want us to continue doing that. The untapped potential I'm talking about at the company level is that a lot of these people are used to getting a complex code base thrown into their lap and having to know it by the end of the week. They don't worry about the tool chains. That's the easy part. The hard part for them is social. Once I know that thing, what do I do with that knowledge? How do I contribute? Who do I talk to? Who do I reach out to? How is this perceived? And so that's where we got to focus on training this group, is how do we help them walk through the social dynamics? And then also recognize that these people, this is from my personal experience of going from the open source into corporation environment, is that they have unique insights. They feel the rough edges of the things that we've shipped, and they've tried to scale it inside of an organization. They feel that. So it's really important we hear them, because they're going to expose the things that maybe the average localhost user either won't share with us or just won't see. Right? Their use case is a little simpler. So we should really benefit from their knowledge base. And so just the challenge is maybe try to challenge yourself to balance how much time you spend writing and contributing code yourself with proactively just looking out at the people showing up to meetings or submitting PRs and prioritize reviewing their stuff and try to accelerate their opportunities to land code changes in the code bases. So practical steps for this group really is look for new faces. Again, I think A lot of the core maintainers actually do a really good job of this, but look for new faces in meetings and welcome them. Call them out and welcome them. Prioritize their pull requests as you see them come in or if they mention that they're doing something. Let's kind of lock arms and accelerate that. And then proactively be involved in just bringing them into the life cycle of being a maintainer. And then ultimately it would be great to just have that paid forward. Let's grow this community. All right, the one that I'm most nervous to talk to. The leadership at these corporations or companies that want to get involved. If you depend on Jupyter at all, you need your engineers involved. I don't think I can say it more plainly. If you have a dependency on it, you need to get involved. But why not fork? Classic question. Okay. So maybe the first thing to say is practically and technically, there is no reason you need to fork. Jupyter is modular enough. The components and the pieces and the building blocks at play are flexible enough for anyone to build the experience that fits their company or their organization using those components to where they don't need to fork, okay? Technically, that's true. Oftentimes, the reason you fork is for a different reason. So you want to move fast, and you want to separate and differentiate, and maybe there's a social barrier there as well. And so I'm going to present to you that I think that my hypothesis is there's a huge cost of forking, and I felt this personally. So this comes from experience, which is over the y-axis shows product advancement, the y-axis shows time, and I think that this yellow curve shows what often happens after someone forks. They get this euphoria from that early forking that happens where they go super fast and they build a product that's really hot and quote unquote better than Jupyter. They experience that really high curve. But over time, they start to realize that when you deviate from that, you start to build up some technical debt. You start to build things in very opinionated ways. You're not going to slow down to build it modular because we care about it. Nobody else. We're not going to contribute. Or even if we open source it, we want to own this idea. We have really strong opinions of how this thing should work, and so we're going to go forward. But over time, you start to accumulate debt, and you don't bring hands along with you to help with that load. And you reach this saturation. The product, we've seen this over and over again, products have died, notebook products have died because of taking this approach. And so my hypothesis here is if you take an open source first strategy, yes, you will experience a little bit of slowness in those early days. And that's because you're going to have to wait around and work with the community to get some things in that you might need. But if you just use the posture of extending the core components and then contributing extension points if you need them, over a long period of time, you will catch up and surpass the saturation curve that you see with products that just went and forked. And the reason why I think that's true is if you just look at the number of pull requests that went into Jupyter Lab, Jupyter Server, and IPyKernel, in the last 5 years, you'll get a number like 6,400 roughly pull requests that have gone in 5 years in the open source community. If you forked 5 years ago, you don't get any of those 6,400 pull requests. That's a lot of motion that went on, right? Like there's very few engineering teams are able to create that many pull requests in that period of time. If you break that up based on the number of pull requests that are labeled as maintenance PRs, a huge fraction of those are maintenance, stability, the modularity, the parts that keep this thing lasting for a decade, right? Very few people can say they've wrote software that lasted 10 to 15 years, and Jupyter has, okay? There's still enhancements going on as well. There's still new features landing in Jupyter, but they do come in at a smaller fraction, right? But because the system is so pluggable, you can build features on top of this for your company that customize it to your experience. That's fine, but use the extension points. Also, just note that there are 15 security vulnerabilities that I'm going to guess your company did not discover that you will have missed. And you are going to have to patch your software with that same fix, right? So you're not getting those for free. You're having to pay that penalty later. And oftentimes, your code is diverged to the point where you may not be able to take those patches in easily. And so this just racks up. This is what causes that saturation curve, okay? And so I hope I've convinced engineering leaders in the room that a strategy I would recommend and one that you should take is really find ways where you can offload as much of the work to the open source and then engage the open source and help carry some of that load and use that kind of shared engineering, that shared maintenance, and also engineering multiplier that you get from having other organizations come in and help pour into the ideas with you. And the way to do that as a team and as an engineering leader is really create space for your engineers to be able to do this well. Okay? And this is a little bit of a paradigm shift. I've not seen organizations do this well, right? And so what that means, I think practically, is that you have to build time for open source into each one of your engineers' time. So into their schedule, their expectations, and then the last one is super important, which is their evaluations. I have seen companies say, yeah, we grant them open source time, but it feels more like a concession than an actual encouragement and something that's valued, right? So someone will go and spend time solving a software problem that ends up benefiting the company when they do their next release out in the open source, and they don't get to put it on their performance review. And so the incentive to do that is very low. And it feels like a cost to them rather than a benefit. So it's really important to do that as an engineering lead, is restructure your evaluations to account for these things in a really measurable way. And then maybe just a subtle one, which is, I've talked a lot about how all of this is a social game, right? You're learning the social dynamics, and there's a lot of like, you turn on your camera and video calls, but also a really important thing is just when you get an opportunity to meet people in person, having that opportunity is critical to building relationship. And so other engineers who want to travel and go to conferences and speak about their product is one thing, and you should have budget for that. You probably should have more budget to let your open source engineers go and travel to see people in person. And it's less about presenting something technical or getting something technical done in that meeting, and more about the relationship growing, so that PRs get easier to unlock over the next 6 months to a year to 10 years. And then to the engineering leaders in the room, please resist the temptation to have this philosophy. Open source is not something to control, it's something to contribute to. You can have influence on it, and honestly, the way that Jupyter evolves in different ways and gets momentum in certain new features is by drumming up energy with it, not trying to dictate the community, okay? And so if you want to do that, go and find people to collaborate with and drum up energy. If you want to work on Jupyter and AI, that's what we did, right? We drummed up energy, and we've got sprints going on that topic. So you've seen a lot of evolution there. And so, yeah, Jupyter really is looking for people to help partner and maintain this project before putting in new features. So if you're like, I want to get involved in the open source because I want to put this feature into Jupyter, that's fine, but that's second to first you showing up and being a partner and being a maintainer and carrying some of that load. And then you'll have room to bring in that new feature. And then I can't leave by saying, without saying to the engineering leaders in the room, if you haven't considered it, you should look at the Jupyter Foundation. There's some great organizations and companies coming in here to just look and help and benefit the Jupyter community in a well-structured, healthy way. Support the community, not try to push it in one direction necessarily. Just encourage it and supplement it with some financial resources. So we'd love for you to come and join our foundation premier board. And this is the list of the people that are currently on there. And so just wanted to give that last pitch. Come talk to me or anybody that you see wearing these company logos to get involved in the foundation.